Hi everyone, thanks for joining me as we start our first step through anxiety and depression in the art form of tag making. So this is part 1, and you will see me create 2 tags that will reflect sort of the dark and gloomy days that we can sometimes feel when we're starting to fight anxiety and depression, or if we continue to fight anxiety and depression. This was a concept that I had been wanting to put together for quite a while, and finally I managed to do it. Thank you to everyone who joined me on the Facebook Lives, and now thank you for joining me with the YouTube. So I hope you find some inspiration. I love tag making, and I wanted to make something that was easy for everyone to be able to enjoy and to be able to replicate in some sort of way, in your own way. And at the same time, create some sort of therapy that can help you work through some of those trying times that we tend to feel. A big statistic is that a lot of us now have some sort of anxiety or depression, or we know someone who has it. So we are all affected in some way through mental health. And October being Mental Health Awareness Month, it was the perfect opportunity to really make these become a reality. So the journey involves a daisy flower, which I think can be one of the most powerful little flowers that tells a story. So I've started by creating some tags. These are 4 by 6 inches, so 4 wide and 6 inches long for those of you playing at home. And all my prints that I'm working on now, so my first little sad daisy here is printed on watercolor paper, because I wanted to be able to choose the effect that I wanted at the finish. Again, not necessary. You guys can just print it on normal paper. You could print it on rice paper, tissue paper, just cardstock. It's completely up to you. I've used boxboard for my tags, and I've also added some modelling paste through a bit of a pebbled stencil, basically. So something that looks kind of like bricks or stonework, just something that's not very, it's sort of heavy but unstructured. I'm now going to paint all of it. Once the modelling paste is completely dry, I'm adding some black gesso over my whole entire tag. So this first tag is entitled Darkness, and it's because this is when we're right in the thick of our despair. So I wanted to replicate the feeling that our minds may feel, that sometimes we feel trapped within our own heads, and it's a very scary and very dark place to be. So this one is called Darkness, and we're going to really play with the black on black. So this is where you can pull out all your black paints, your black inks, and just get a little creative with it. So I'm now going to make sure that this is completely dry again. And once it is, I'm going to grab my black stamp pad. Now it can be any sort of black ink pad, and just with a bit of textured stamps, going to create this little bit of chaotic background with the texture stamp. So I'm just layering them over the top of each other. Again, black on black, black stamp on black background. So you can see these are quite jagged lines at the moment, and then I've grabbed another one sort of similar and going over same sort of areas as the first stamp, which was also over the areas where the modelling paste was. So you can see how the black sort of starts to sit slightly shiny on top, which was very cool. I hadn't played with black on black. Well, I had a little bit, but not to this extent. So it was a little nerve-wracking. In fact, it kind of gave me a little bit of anxiety while I was creating it. But I really liked the outcome. So I'm adding another textured stamp, background stamp, to my layers. I hope you enjoy creating these at home. Be sure to check out the link in the description of the YouTube for my website channel, a website address, and this will have the link to the downloads that you can have. So they will be available for the month of October, and at the end of October they will be up for sale, printed, and can be posted for a small fee. Now, while my ink was still slightly wet rather, I did dry it off a little bit because I didn't want it all to be wet. While it's still a little bit wet, I've added a little bit of black emboss powder. In any random fashion, it doesn't really matter. It was just to get a little bit of a different black on there, but something that still created a dimension. So emboss powder, this one has a slight bit of silver in it, just to create that difference on the background. And then I heat set that emboss powder to create it into the background. On my actual watercolor picture, I have added a little bit of modeling paste with that same stencil on it as well. That's off to the side drying at this stage. So you can see how all the black on black is definitely layered on top of each other. I'm now going to heavily distress all my edges of my tag. Really distressing it. You can see how much is actually peeling off onto the table. So I'm really grunging it up, really distressing those edges, roughing them right up. And then I'll grab my blending tool and I am going to darken those edges yet again. So just with the blending tool, adding some texture and adding some colour to those edges. So they're super frayed, a bit like how our minds can feel sometimes. And then with the leftover ink, I am rubbing that over my tag as well. So where the emboss powder went, I have now used some black VersaFine ink over the top. Just again to dull that shininess away, because we don't want anything too shiny, because often when we're in the depths of despair, there's nothing shiny about it. It was just more about getting that contrasting layering. I've now grabbed some Liquitex black ink and I'm dribbling it down my tag. This will sit right on top of all my layers and it will create quite a nice contrast to the background. Now, if you don't have black ink, then by all means you could do this with some watered down acrylic paint. As long as you get that nice drippy effect, anything will work. You might have some other inks in your stash. Even an alcohol ink will work, dribbling it down your page, because it will give a contrast to the backgrounds. So yeah, get a little creative with what you use. There's no wrong, there's only always right when it's this sort of crafting, and especially with mixed media, pretty much anything goes. I'm now drying that ink so that I can work on top of it and just making sure it's completely dry. Cleaning the mess as I go, because black ink can hang around for a while. So now I'm thinking about what I'm going to do with the concept behind my image. So in the downloadables that you'll find online, they are color matched to the weeks of the tags. So this particular tag set was black and grey, and I'm now tearing a couple of these tags to suit the mood. So I've really jagged them up, really torn them, because often that's how I feel when I'm not doing so great. I feel a little bit torn and a little bit lost, and with no real clear direction. So I wanted that to also resemble in my layering. So once I was happy with the amount of tearing that I had done, I then stapled those couple of pieces together, and I'm just starting to darken the edges again with my blending tool. So I don't really want any white showing. I want to make it all quite dark. I didn't mind that it went a lighter shade of black, so a bit more of a grey, because our next tag is a grey, so that sort of then they work well together. So you can see I've really quite darkened those edges to match in with the background. So originally this was going to be a series of 3 lives and YouTubes, but I decided to break it up a little bit, and I'm going to do the front page as a separate, because I thought it would be fun just to create the front cover as its own little tutorial or Facebook, so we can have some fun with that. So this is part 1. It's part 1 of 3 lots of tags, and there's 7 in the series, so you'll make 7 plus a front cover. So the front cover will probably be completely unique and your own, but the tags will have the free downloads with them. So I'm using some of that Liquitex black ink now as a bit of a watercolour. So I've just spritzed my watercolour paper around where the modelling paste was placed, and now I'm just moving that ink around with a fine paintbrush and just sort of shadowing in where my daisy is. Feeling quite enclosed and dark. The daisy looks quite sad, so I wanted to really make that feeling of being trapped within yourself around my daisy. So I'm adding that Liquitex ink and just moving it around and playing in amongst the modelling paste. I'm adding a bit of water here and there just to help it move a little bit more and also create different shades. So you can see I'm really closing in around my daisy head. Just dabbed away some of the excess ink, and then I'm completely drying it. Now with my blending tool, I'm going in around my edges, and you can see I'm just dusting over the areas that I've added the ink as well as the edges. I also roughed up the edges a little bit of my picture. Now we're going to place it all together. So you can see how you can see all the different shades of black on top, layering on top of one another, I was really pleased with how that came about. I really didn't think that you'd actually see the difference, but because every brand is, not all blacks are the same. So it was really quite cool to be able to see this all come together. So I'm now foam taping my background paper to my actual picture, and then I'll foam tape this onto my tag. Just reinforcing my foam tape with a bit of glue because of all the mixed media on my tag. I've hole punched the side of my tags also because when we put them all together, I'm just going to just ring bind them, and it keeps it all very consistent, I guess. But it gives us something to, put them all together with. So now that is foam tape up nice and evenly. I'm next going to start to think about the titles of my tag. So there is a main word for each tag, and then there is a smaller word for each tag. So one that sort of reflects maybe the emotion or the feeling that goes with the main title. So this one is darkness, and the other word with it is despair. So it's quite, they go hand in hand. So when you're feeling at your lowest low or in the darkest pit of despair, so hence these two words go well together. And of course I'm roughing up the edges and then blackening them up, and I'm going to do that on both. So they're both distressed with my scissors, and then I'm just darkening the edges. And then these are going to be foam taped also. This first tag is nearly complete. I didn't want to overcomplicate it. I wanted to let it say something without having to add too much to it. So hopefully I've managed to do that. Finally, I'm going to just flick some black ink. So just a little bit of that same Liquitex black ink, and I'm just flicking it around my daisy as well as onto the background, so you still then get that contrast. And that's the first tag complete. I hope you had some fun creating that one. So this is our completed tag. You can see the texture, the different shades of black on black, our sad looking daisy, and of course our words that tell the story. So our next tag will have similar references to our first tag with a bit of difference. So this one here is entitled Alone, which is sometimes exactly how we feel when we aren't feeling great mentally and emotionally, and we feel like we're the only ones that feel like this, that no one else will understand, and that we are kind of trapped within our own selves. So this one here, we start off with the same size, so 4 inches wide by 6 inches long, and I am priming it with white gesso. So again, like I said, it's going to have similar reflections as the first one, so a couple of elements are going to be similar, but then we're going to try and create that chaotic mindset with some stamping. So we're going to make sure that our white gesso is completely dry, ready for, again, our stencil and modelling paste. I've chosen to use the same stencil as the first one because I wanted it to be a similar kind of story. Alone and darkness tend to go hand in hand, so I wanted this to actually yeah, really talk to each other as well as talk to ourselves, really. So make sure that this is completely dry. So yes, I'm using the same stencil. Now this is part of a Tim Holtz range, this stencil. It's part of the mini set. If you're interested, just PM me and I will let you know which one it is. So I'm going to attack this tag in a similar way as the first one and put the same amount of stenciling in similar areas as our darkness tag. Not putting as much, I'm only focusing on the right hand side of my tag for this one. And again, I'm going to put a little bit of that reference onto my actual daisy picture, so my second daisy picture, which has the head lifting just that little bit more. Still quite down. The daisy still looks quite sad, but it's lifted its head up a little bit because it's recognizing things. And it's recognizing that we're feeling alone. Just cleaning my stencil. And then I'll make sure that this modeling paste is dry. So my modeling paste that I've used on the darkness tag and this one is actually a crackle, so that the inks and the paints will soak into it and really create that difference in the distress look as well. So again, this isn't necessary, but that's just what I chose for this particular couple of tags, and wanted to create that, you know, visual interest as well. So now that that's completely dry, I've now grabbed a variety of different number and letter stamps. And using my black ink pad, I'm now going to create some sort of chaos with these numbers and letters. So you can see I'm twisting and turning my stamp, and I'm overlapping them, and I'm going in with you know, some seconds and third ghosting prints, I guess you could call it, over what I've already stamped, so that you're not getting it all just black, one color of black. It has some light and shade to it. I'm now adding an alpha stamp, an alphabet stamp, and again, I don't want the whole entire stamp, I just want pops of it, so that it feels like when your mind is so full, it's just like a collection of words and things that don't really mean anything and just going round and round in circles. So I was trying to portray that with these particular stamps. So again, a different sized alpha stamp, so that it's got that difference between each layer. Now I'm really only adding it to half of my tag, so the tag that doesn't have the modeling paste, and then I'll add a little bit to my actual daisy picture, so that when we place it on top, it feels like those words are coming at us, or that chaos is coming towards us. So this tag, the color tone to it was going to be, it is grey with that referencing of black. I'm now darkening the edges of my tag with that same black ink, and making sure that it burnishes onto the inside of my tag as well. It's not just the edges, it's creating that, you know, inside kind of feel. And I've only done it on the 3 sides, the 2 short and 1 long at this stage. Now thinking about playing with some colour, and I wasn't real sure how to get this nice grey that's deep enough. I have quite a few greys in my collection, but they are actually quite light. So I decided to grab the black gesso and with a dry paintbrush, dry brush this onto my tag. And as you can see, it's done quite roughly and it's bringing in the edges together. So as I've gone from dark to light within the transition of to the middle. So I've added the darkness on the edge, and then as it's a dry brush, as I go into the center of my tag, it starts to progressively get lighter. It has more of that grey tone rather than black. And I'm going to make sure that's dry now. Great thing about gesso is it dries super quick, and it means you can move on to the next step quickly. So now I've got a grey acrylic paint. This colour is, I think it's called Elephant. It's a Dina Wakley paint. And again, dry brush, and I'm just brushing over where the modelling paste is into that centre of my tag. So this, having put the black gesso on, allowed me to have some direction of where I wanted to add the acrylic. So I've painted over that black gesso, which made the grey sort of pop out a little bit more, and really get in the cracks of the modelling paste, I guess you could say. So you can see that now I've got grey, these are 3x4 pieces of card that I'm going to use to do the backlay behind my picture. I've just grabbed a Distress Oxide in Hickory Smoke, and I'm going to just paint or add this colour to the modelling paste on my picture around my daisy. So the last tag we went in really quite dark, we went with black. This time I'm going with the greys. Now I will use a variety of greys on this because this one was too light, as you can see, and it just didn't capture that right feel from the last one. So I end up using 3 colours, so 2 greys, and I end up I think even using a tiny bit of black just to sort of darken that edge a little bit. So now with the remaining of that Elephant acrylic, I'm going to add that as well to my modelling paste on my picture, and I'm flicking it as well because I've watered it down because we're on watercolour paper, and it just makes that shadowed movement effect look quite effective. I also decided that I wanted to start adding a bit of colour to my daisy, so I've only coloured with the grey one petal, just one petal of my daisy head. And now I'm flicking that watered down acrylic over the back of my picture, my tag rather, as well as a little bit over my picture. I'm going to tear my 3x4 pieces of paper in a very similar way to the first one because I wanted it to reflect that darkness that we still feel, especially when we're in the midst of feeling alone. Just adding a bit more water to my watercolour so that the grey would move just a little bit more, and then drying it. So making sure everything is nice and dry now. Working out which tags I'll need because I wanted some that still reflected that darkness from the start. So this one had quite a few dark colours through it, as well as the lighter grey as well. So again, like I said, I want to create something very similar to the first one. So I have torn the edges of my cards and creating a composition behind my picture to reflect a very similar feel to that first one. Obviously, when you tear paper, it's never exactly going to be the same, but it's going to be something similar. Just thinking about it. And then I'm going to staple these together just so that I can have them together nice and easy for when I put them underneath my picture. I found it quite hard to work with such dark colours and not have one pop of bright. But it was a really good challenge and I really enjoyed the process. Just going to distress my picture and then I'm going to ink it, and I'm also going to ink around my torn edges of the card that's sitting behind my picture. And I'm also going to, as you can see here, just distress and rough up my tag as well. So in comes the black ink again to create that nice burnished shadowing look. Without taking away the grey. And again, I didn't want real white edges, so a little bit of black. But I didn't mind them to be a little bit lighter than the last one. So this one here isn't quite as enclosed as the first one. You can see I've left the daisy head a little bit freer. But it's listening to all the chaos that's going on within our minds. So I'm just going to stamp some of these numbers and letters now onto my picture. The way the daisy head is sort of turned up a little bit, it's like it's when we're listening to our own thoughts and we think we're not worth anything. And we're just constantly going over and over what we're feeling in our own heads, or trying to understand what we're feeling in our own heads. So that's what this little daisy head reminded me of. I have been an anxiety sufferer for 15 years now, and to say it gets easier would be a lie, but there are certainly some awesome coping mechanisms out there. I can have quite acute crippling anxiety at times, and creating is certainly an art form that has helped me. I have a very amazing support network around me as well, which also helps, I feel sorry for them because I'm sure I'm not the easiest person when I'm not so great. So I hope all of you have got an amazing support crew behind you as well, and that you find some peace when it comes to creating. I am now just using a bit of double-sided tape to just stick these paper layers behind my picture. And then I'm going to foam tape this onto my tag. So you can see that the numbers and letters on the side of my tag also reflect the numbers and letters on the side of my picture. Just adding foam tape where I need it to make sure there's no uneven surfaces. So now I'm getting the words ready. So the word alone, and the little word for this one is, oh, my mind's gone blank. I'll see it in a minute. So we're starting with alone, and I'm going to ink the edges to this word also, distress and ink. And still make the word quite dark. And then I'll do that on our little word as well. And I'm going to foam tape the alone word up again. I always like having my words foam taped, especially the main words, so that, I don't know, they just sort of speak out from the back of everything else that's going on. And that's this tag pretty much complete. I'm going to dribble a little bit of that black ink, just like on the first one, to just replicate that first bit of mood. And then because it's so dark, I ended up dabbing it away a little bit with some baby wipe, because I wanted it to sort of get captured within that modelling paste but not be really dominant like it is in the first one. And then I'm going to flick some black ink over it, just a little bit, because this one I wanted to be grey. And that's our tag done. Look out for part 2 coming very, very soon here on YouTube, and also the Facebook Lives in Sew Embellishment Facebook page. Our lives are there. So thank you so much for joining me. Happy creating, and I look forward to seeing what you create. I'll see you all for part 2. See ya.